Hi, everybody. We are back today with chapter 6 and 7 of The City of Ember. If you recall last time, we were learning a bit about the troubles in Ember, and it's gotten to a place where Lena can't really ignore these things anymore. So the last section of reading was kind of dark. It lacked a little bit of hope, but the good news is we take a turn right now. Chapter 6 and 7 start to help us solve some of the issues that are going on in Ember. So let's jump right in. Chapter 6 is called The Box in the Closet. It was strange how people didn't talk much about the blackout. Power failures usually aroused lively discussion, with clumps of people collecting on corners and saying to each other, "Where were you when it happened?" And "What's the matter with the electricians? We should kick them out and get new ones," and that sort of thing. This time, it was just the opposite. When Lena went to work the next morning, the street was oddly silent. People walked quickly, their eyes on the ground. Those who did stop to talk spoke in low voices, then hurried on their way. So if you're looking for vocabulary for this chapter, you've got a really nice word over here, okay? And we've got a situation where it seems like people aren't gossiping so much about the event because it scared them. It legitimately caused panic and uncertainty. And you'll find that when people are legitimately panicked, they tend to be quiet. They're a little more introspective. That day, Lena carried the same message 12 times. All the messengers were carrying it. It was simply this, being passed from one person to another. 7 minutes. The power failure had been more than twice as long as any other so far. So this is the root of their fear. The fact that these power failures are not just getting more frequent, but they're getting longer. And if you can imagine how inconvenient a blackout feels to you, multiply that by like 100, because these people have no source of light except for the ones that are run by the electricity. Fear had settled over the city. Lena felt it like a cold chill. So here we have a nice little simile. She understood now that Dune had been speaking the truth on assignment day. Ember was in grave danger. Here's another great vocabulary word to grab if you need one. The next day, a notice appeared on all the city's kiosks. Another good vocab word. Town meeting. All citizens are requested to assemble in Harkin Square at 6 p.m. tomorrow to receive important information. Mayor Leamander Cole. So if you want to put his first name in the character chart, you can do that. What kind of important information? Lena wondered. Good news or bad? She was impatient to hear it. The next day, people streamed into Harkin Square from all 4 directions, crowding together so close that each person hardly had room to move. Children sat on the shoulders of fathers. Short people tried to push toward the front. Lena spotted Lizzie and called a greeting to her. She saw Vindy Chance, too, who had brought her little brother. Lena had decided to leave Poppy at home with Granny. There was too much danger of losing her in a crowd like this. The town clock began to strike. 6 vibrating bongs ran out, and a murmur of anticipation swept through the crowd. People stood on tiptoe, craning to see. The door of the gathering hall opened, and the mayor came out, flanked by 2 guards. One of the guards handed the mayor a megaphone, and the mayor began to speak. His voice came through the megaphone both blurry and crackly. "People of Ember," he said. He waited. The crowd fell silent, straining to hear. "People of Ember," the mayor said again. He looked from side to side. The light glinted off his bald head. "Our city has experienced some slight difficulty. Times like this require gresh passion. What did he say? People whispered urgently. What did he say? I couldn't hear him. Slight difficulties, someone said, requires great patience from us all. But I stand here today, the mayor went on, to reassure you, difficult times will pass. We are making a... What? Came the sharp whisper. What did he say? Those near the front passed word back. Making every effort, they said. Every effort! Louder! Someone shouted. The mayor's voice blared through the megaphone, louder, but even less clear. Worse partialing, he said. Pink! Mushin pink! No Russian pink! We can't hear you, someone else yelled. Lena felt a stirring around her, a muttering, someone pushing against her back, forcing her forward. He said we mustn't panic, someone said. He said panic is the worst possible thing. No reason to panic, he said. On the steps of the gathering hall, the two guards moved a little closer to the mayor. He raised the megaphone and spoke again. Solutions, he bellowed. Arbitration. Solutions, the people in front called to the people in the back. Solutions are being found, he said. What solutions? Called a woman standing near Lena. People elsewhere in the crowd echoed what the woman had said. What solutions? What solutions? Their cry became a chorus, louder and louder. Again, Lena felt the pressure from behind as people moved forward toward the gathering hall. Jostling arms poked her, bulky bodies bumped her, and crushed her. Well, look at that alliteration right there. Bulky bodies bumped. Her heart began to pound. I have to get out of here, she thought. She started ducking beneath arms and darting into whatever space she could find, making her way toward the rear of the crowd. Noise was rising everywhere. The mayor's voice kept coming in blasts of incomprehensible sound, and the people in the crowds were either shouting angrily or yelping in fear of being squashed. Someone stepped on Lena's foot, and her scarf was half yanked off. For a few seconds, she was afraid she was going to be trampled. But at last she struggled free and ran up onto the steps of the school. From there she saw the two guards were hustling the mayor back through the door of the gathering hall. The crowd roared, and a few people started hurling whatever they could find. Pebbles, garbage, crumpled paper, even their own hats. At the other side of the square, Dune and his father battled their way down Gilly Street. Move fast, his father said. We don't want to be caught up in this crowd. They crossed Broad Street and took the long way home, through the narrow lanes behind the school. Father, said Dune as they hurried along, the mayor is a fool, don't you think? For a moment his father didn't answer. Then he said, he's in a tough spot, son. What would you have him do? Not lie, at least, Dune said. If he really has a solution, he should have told us. He shouldn't pretend he has solutions when he doesn't. Dune's father smiled. That would be a great start, he agreed. It makes me so angry the way he talks to us, said Dune. Dune's father put a hand on Dune's back and steered him toward the corner. A great many things make you angry lately, he said. For good reason, said Dune. Maybe. The trouble with anger is, it gets hold of you, and then you aren't the master of yourself anymore. Anger is. That is powerful advice, not just in a book, but in life. Once you let anger take a hold of you, it's in charge. That is an example of personification. Because in reality, anger can't hold on to you like a person can. But the idea of that piece of figurative language is certainly there. Dune walked on silently. Inwardly, he groaned. He knew what his father was going to say, and he didn't feel like hearing it. And when anger is the boss, you get, I know, said Dune, unintended consequences. So there's an extension of the personification, anger being the boss, right? And causing unintended consequences. And if you don't know what those words mean, those are great words to use for the vocabulary right there. That's right. Like hitting your father in the ear with a shoe heel. I didn't mean to. That's exactly my point. They walked on down Pibb Street. Dune shoved his hands into the pockets of his jacket and scowled at the sidewalk. Father doesn't even have a temper, he thought. He's as mild as a glass of water. He can't possibly understand. Lena was running. She'd already dismissed the mayor's speech from her mind. She sped by the people on Otterwill Street, going back to the open stores, and overheard snatches of conversation as she passed. "Expects us to believe," said one voice. "He's just trying to keep us quiet," said another. "Heading for disaster," said a third. All the voices shook with anger and fear. Lena didn't want to think about it. Her feet slapped the stones of the street. Her hair flew out behind her. She would go home. She would make hot potato soup for the three of them, and then she would take out her new pencils and draw. She climbed the stairs next to the yarn shop 2 at a time and burst through the door of the apartment. But something was on the floor just in front of her feet, and she tripped and fell down hard on her hands and knees. She stared. By the open closet door was a great pile of coats and boots and bags and boxes, their contents all spilled out and tangled up. A thumping and rattling came from inside the closet. "Granny?" More thumps. Granny's head poked out from the edge of the closet door. "I should have looked in here a long time ago," she said. "This is where it would be, of course. You should see what's in here." So just to remember, we still have Granny looking for what her grandfather lost, right? And her grandfather, if you remember, was who? The 7th mayor of Ember. So she's looking for the lost item the 7th mayor told her about. Now, you and I know what that lost item is. And because we know that that lost item is the instructions from the builders, this is an example of what's called dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is when we know more than what the characters in the story know. We know what's in the box. We know what the 7th mayor lost. But Granny doesn't. She just knows she has to look for something. So let's see what happens. Lena gazed around at the incredible mess. Into this closet had been packed the junk of decades, jammed into cardboard boxes, stuffed into old pillowcases and laundry bags, and heaped up in a pile so dense you couldn't pull out one thing without pulling out the rest of it. The shelf above the coat rack was just as crammed as the space below, mostly with old clothes that were full of moth holes and eaten away by mildew. When she was younger, Lena had tried exploring in that closet, but she never got very far. She'd pull out an old scarf that would fall to pieces in her hands, or open a box that proved to be full of bent carpet tacks. Soon, she would shove everything back in and give up. But Granny was really doing the job right. She grunted and panted as she wrenched free the closet's packed-in stuff and tossed it behind her. It was clear that she was having fun. As Lena watched, a bag of rags came tumbling out the door, and then an old brown shoe with no laces. "Granny," said Lena, suddenly uneasy, "where's the baby?" "Oh, she's here," came Granny's voice from the depths of the closet. "She's been helping me." Lena got up from the floor and looked around. She soon spotted Poppy. She was sitting behind the couch in the midst of the clutter. In front of her was a small box made of something dark and shiny. It had a hinged lid, and the lid was open, hanging backward. Bing, 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 bing! Ladies and gentlemen, we have a winner! This is the box. The question is, what's in it? And did it survive Poppy? Because let's remember, your average 2 to 3-year-old is not exactly gentle with ancient artifacts. Poppy said, "Lena, let me see that." And she stooped down, and there was some sort of mechanism on the edge of the lid, a kind of lock, Lena thought. The box was beautifully made, but it had been damaged. There were dents and scratches in its hard, smooth surface. It looked as if it had been a container of something valuable. But the box was empty now. Lena picked it up and felt around in it to be sure. There was nothing inside at all. Oh, that hurts. If only Lena had been home. Was there something in this box, Poppy? Did you find something in here? But Poppy only chortled happily. She was chewing on some crumpled paper. She had paper in her hands, too, and was tearing it. Shreds of paper were strewn around her. Lena picked one up. It was covered with small, perfect prince. Okay, folks, so I'm going to take us into a little vocabulary detour for a moment, and let's look at the word chortled. Chortled is a fun word. It was actually invented by Lewis Carroll for the book Alice in Wonderland. Chortled is a combination of two words together. It is chuckled plus snorted. And the invention of two words to make a new word is called portmanteau. It's a French term which literally means suitcase. So you actually have to unpack the meaning of both word parts in order to understand the meaning of the new word. So when it says that Poppy is chortling, she's chuckling and snorting at the same time. You've heard people laugh so hard that they end up snorting. That's a chortle. And it's a word that was invented to encompass the meaning of both of the words that make it up. So portmanteau is a beautiful French term which means suitcase, but in our language what that really translates into is a word that's packed with multiple meaning. Okay, so kind of a fun vocabulary word. I do not recommend you use this one in the slides as I just did the work for you. Okay, so we're in a good place. We're in an interesting place. Let's keep on going and see what happens. We are now in chapter 7, a message full of holes. Oh, Poppy, what did you do? It was the printing that sparked Lena's curiosity. It was not handwriting, or if it was the neatest, most regular handwriting she had ever seen. It was more like the letters printed on the cans of food or along the sides of pencils. Something other than a hand had written these words, a machine of some kind. This was the writing of the builders, and so this piece of paper must have come from the builders too. Lena gathered up scraps of paper from the floor and gently pried open Poppy's fists and mouth to extract the crumpled wads. She put all this into the dented box and carried it to her room. That evening, Granny and the baby were both asleep by a little after 8. Lena had nearly an hour to examine her discovery. She took the scraps from the box and spread them out on the table in her bedroom. The paper was thick. At each torn edge was a fringe of tangled fibers. There were many little pieces and one big piece with so many holes in it that it was like lace. The chewed bits were beyond saving. They were almost a paste. But Lena spread out the big lacy piece and saw that on one edge of it, which was still intact, was a column of numbers. She collected all the dry scraps and puzzled over them for a long time, trying to figure out where they fit into the larger piece. When she had arranged them as well as she could, this is what she had. So just quickly, we have the big piece of paper with so many holes. It was like lace. So that's a nice simile. But this is what she saw. This is what this looks like. Okay. Now, as you can see, this is like a puzzle, right? It almost reminds me of our escape room. You would really have to sit down and pore over this to try and figure things out. Some words we can kind of, based on context clues, guess. So we know that INSTRU leads us to the idea that this says instructions. Okay, 4. Now this is an interesting word right here. This word is a real word. It just needs an S. Okay, egress. Egress is a fancy word also taken from the French, meaning to exit. Of course, keep in mind, Lena doesn't have the vocabulary that we do. So she's not necessarily going to be familiar with the word egress, nor is she necessarily going to be able to decode that this says instructions. She might think it says instruments. We don't know. So what this literally is are the instructions to exit the city. She found them. The problem is this is what they look like. So I'm not going to read this page to you. I highly recommend you take a few minutes reading through it yourself to see if you can puzzle it out. But it just simply doesn't make sense, as you can tell. Okay. Some things are intact. We do see that it says 3 hours. So we know that's the time that they would have to travel. But other than that, we're kind of stuck, as is Lena. Let's see what she does. Lena could make sense of only a few words here and there. Even so, Something about this tattered document was exciting. It was not like anything Lena had ever seen. She stared at the very first word at the top of the page, instru. And she suddenly knew what it must be. She'd seen it often enough at school. It had to be the beginning of instructions. So Lena figured that one out. Good job. Her heart began knocking at her chest like a fist at a door. Ooh, nice simile. She had found something. She had found something strange and important. Instructions for something, but for what? And how terrible that Poppy had found it first and ruined it. It occurred to Lena that this might be what her grandmother had been talking about for so long. Perhaps this was the thing that was lost. But of course, not knowing what had been lost, Granny wouldn't have recognized the box when she saw it. She would have tossed it out of the closet just as carelessly as she tossed everything else. Anyhow, it didn't matter whether this was a thing or not. It was a mystery in and of itself, whatever it was, and Lena was determined to solve it. The first step was to stick the scraps of paper down. They were so light that a breath could scatter them. But she had a little bit of glue left in an old bottle. Painstakingly, she put a dot of glue on each of the scraps and pressed each one into its place on one of her few precious remaining whole sheets of paper. She put another piece of paper on top of this and set the box on top to flatten everything down. Just as she finished, the lights went out. She'd forgotten to keep an eye on the clock on her windowsill. She had to undress and get into bed in the dark. She was too excited to sleep much that night. Her mind whirled around, trying to think what the message she'd found might be. She felt sure it had something to do with saving the city. What if these instructions were for fixing the electricity or for making a movable light? That would change everything. When the lights went on in the morning, she had a few minutes before Poppy wakened to work at the puzzle. But there were so many words missing. How could she ever make sense out of such a jumble? As she pulled on her red jacket and tied the frayed and knotted laces of her shoes, she thought about it. If the paper was important, she shouldn't keep it to herself. But who could she tell? Maybe the messenger captain. She would know about things like official documents. "Captain Fleary," Lena said when she got to work, "would you have time to come home with me later today, just for a minute? I found something I'd like to show you." "Found what?" asked Captain Fleary. "Some paper with writing on it. I think it might be important." Captain Fleary raised her skinny eyebrows. "What do you mean, important?" "Well, I'm not sure. Maybe it isn't. But would you look at it anyway?" So that evening, Captain Fleary came home with Lena and peered at the bits of paper. She bent down and inspected the writing. "Fall," she said. "Ax, rem, aunt. What kind of words are those?" "I don't know," said Lena. "The words are all broken up because Poppy chewed on them." "I see," said Captain Fleary. She poked at the paper. "This looks like instructions for something," she said. "A recipe, I suppose. Small steel pan. That would be what you use to cook it with." "But who would have such small, perfect writing?" "That's the way people wrote in the old days," said Captain Fleary. "It could be a very old recipe." "But then why would it have been kept in this beautiful box?" She showed the box to Captain Fleary. "I think it was locked up in here for some reason, and you wouldn't lock something up unless it was important." But Captain Fleary didn't seem to have heard her. "Or," she said, "it could be a school exercise, someone's homework that never got turned in." "But have you ever seen paper like this? Doesn't it look as if it came from someplace else, not here?" Captain Fleary straightened up. A look of puzzlement came over her face. "There is nowhere but here," she said. She put both her hands on Lena's shoulders. "You, my dear, are letting your imagination run away with you. Are you overtired, Lena? Are you anxious? I could put you on short days for a while." "No," said Lena. "I'm fine, I am. But I don't know what to do about—" She gestured toward the paper. "Never mind," said Captain Fleary. "Don't think about it. Throw it away. You're worrying too much. I know. We all are. There's so much to worry about. But we mustn't let it unsettle us." She gave Lena a long look. Her eyes were the color of dishwater. "Help is coming," she said. "Help?" "Yes, coming to save us." Who is? Captain Fleury bent down and lowered her voice as if telling a secret. Who built our city, dear? The builders, said Lena. That's right. And the builders will come again and show us the way. They will? Very soon, said Captain Fleury. How do you know? Captain Fleury straightened up and clapped a hand over her heart. I know it here, she said, and I've seen it in a dream. So have all of us, all the believers. So that's what they believe, Lena thought. And Captain Fleury is one of them. She wondered how the captain could feel so sure about it just because she had seen it in a dream. Maybe it was the same for her as the sparkling city was for Lena. She wanted it to be true. So, in the character chart, we don't have anything for Captain Fleury yet. This is a great time to stop and add. So, Captain Fleury, she's the head of the messengers. She is a believer. So, what is it that she believes? That the builders will come again and show the way. So, this is her religious belief, let's call it. Okay? It seems like in this society, there hasn't been any mention of any religion. And at this point, this is kind of our first indication that there are people that are faithful to something greater than themselves. It's just in this particular instance, it's not a religion that would be practiced in our world. Okay? If you want to add any other details about her, you could say that she kind of dismisses Lena's concern. She tells her that she's anxious. She tells her she's overtired. And she tells her to throw away the instructions, which is interesting because we, as readers, know how very important those instructions are for all of this society. And it does go to show you that adults don't always know everything. They try their best, but they don't always have the answers. So, let's continue. The captain's face lit up. I know what you must do, dear. Come to one of our meetings. It would lift your heart. We sing. Oh, said Lena, thank you, but I'm not so sure. Maybe sometime. She tried to be polite, but she knew she wouldn't go. She didn't want to stand around waiting for the builders. She had other things to do. Captain Fleury patted her arm. No pressure, dear, she said. If you change your mind, let me know. But take my advice. Forget about your little puzzle project. Lie down and take a nap. It clears the mind. Her narrow face beamed kindness down at Lena. You take tomorrow off, she said. She raised a hand goodbye and went down the stairs. Lena took advantage of her day off to go to the supply depot to see Lizzie Biscoe. Lizzie was quick and smart. She might have some good ideas. So, in the character chart, let's jump into Lizzie's page. By now, you should have added that she's a supply depot clerk. You should have added that she's one of Lena's best friends. If you didn't have those things, you need to put them in now. And here, Lena describes her as quick and smart. So, looks like this is the next person she's going to try to solicit help from with this letter. At the supply depot, crowds of shopkeepers stood in long, disorderly lines that stretched out the door. They pushed and jostled and snapped impatiently at each other. Lena joined them, but they seemed so frantic that they frightened her a little. They must be very sure now that the supplies are running out, she thought, and they're determined to get what they can before it's too late. When she got close to the head of the line, she heard the same conversation several times. Sorry, the clerk would say when a shopkeeper asked for 10 packets of sewing needles, or a dozen drinking glasses, or 20 packages of light bulbs. There's a severe shortage of that item. You can only have one. Or the clerk would say, sorry, we're out of that entirely. Forever? Forever. Lena knew it hadn't always been this way. When Ember was a young city, the storerooms were full. They held everything the citizens could want, so much it seemed the supplies would never run out. Lena's grandmother had told her that school children were given a tour of the storerooms as part of their education. They took an elevator from the street level to a long curving tunnel with doors on both sides and other tunnels branching off it. The guide led the tour down the long passages, opening one door after another. This area, he would say, is canned goods. Next we come to school supplies. And around this bend we have kitchenware. Next comes carpentry tools. At each door the children crowded against each other to see. Every room had something different, Granny told Lena. Boxes of toothpaste in one room, bottles of cooking oil, bars of soap, boxes of pills. There were 20 rooms just for vitamin pills. One room was stacked with hundreds of cans of fruit. There was something called pineapple. I remember that one especially. What was pineapple? Asked Lena. It was yellow and sweet, said Granny with a dreamy look in her eyes. I had it 4 times before we ran out of it. But these tours had been discontinued long before Lena was born. The storerooms, people said, were no longer a pleasure to look at. Their dusty shelves stood mostly empty now. It was rumored that in some rooms nothing was left at all. A child seeing the rooms where powdered milk had been stored, or the rooms that stored bandages or socks or pins or notebooks, or, most of all, the dozens of rooms that had once held thousands of light bulbs, would not feel, as earlier generations of children had, that Ember was endlessly rich. Today's children, if they were to tour the storerooms, would feel afraid. Thinking about all of this, Lena waited in line of people at Lizzie's station. When she got to the front, she leaned forward with her elbows on the counter and whispered, "Lizzie, can you meet me after you're through with work? I'll wait for you right outside the door." Lizzie nodded eagerly. At 4 o'clock, Lizzie came trotting out of the office door. Lena said to her, "Will you come home with me for a minute? I want to show you something." "Sure," said Lizzie. And as they walked, Lizzie talked. "My wrist is killing me from writing all day," she said. "You have to write in the tiniest letters to save paper, so I get a terrible cramp in my wrist and my fingers. And people are so rude. Today they're worse than ever. I said to some guy, 'You can't have 15 cans of corn, you can only have 3. And he said, 'Look, don't tell me that. I saw plenty of cans in the Pot Street Market just yesterday.' And I said, 'Well, that's why there aren't so many left today.' And he said, 'Don't be smart with me, carrot head. What am I supposed to do? I can't make cans of corn out of thin air.'" They passed through Harkin Square, around the gathering hall, and down Roving Street, where 3 of the floodlights were out, making a cave of shadow. "Lizzie," said Lena, interrupting the flow of talk, "is it true about the light bulbs?" "Is what true?" "That there aren't many left?" Lizzie shrugged. "I don't know. They hardly ever let us go downstairs into the storerooms. All we see are the reports the carriers turn in. How many forks in room 1146, how many doorknobs in room 3291, how many children's shoes in room 2249. But when you see the report for the light bulb rooms, what does it say?" "I never get to see that one," said Lizzie. "That one and a few of the other ones, like the vitamin report, only a few people can see." "Who?" "Oh, the mayor and, of course, old Flabface." Lena looked at her questioningly. "Oh, you know, Farlow Batten, the head of the storerooms. He's so mean. Lena, you would just hate him. He counts us late when we come in, even 2 minutes after 8. And he looks over our shoulders as we're writing, which is awful because he has bad breath. And he runs his finger over what we've written and said, 'That word is illegible. This word is illegible. These numbers are illegible.' It's his favorite word, illegible." It's a pretty good word. So if you don't know it, you might use it for vocabulary. When they came to Lena Street, Lena ducked her head to the door of the yarn shop and said hello to Granny, and then they climbed the stairs to the apartment. Lizzie was talking about how hard it was to stand up all day and how it made her knees ache and how her shoes pinched her feet. She stopped talking long enough to say hello to Eveline Murdo, who was sitting by the window with Poppy in her lap, and then she began again as Lena led her to her bedroom. "Lena, where were you when the big blackout came?" she asked, but she just went right on without waiting for an answer. "I was home, luckily, but it was scary, wasn't it?" Lena nodded. She didn't want to talk about what happened that day. "I hate those blackouts," Lizzie went on. "People say there's going to be more and more of them and that someday." She stopped and frowned and started again. "Anyway, nothing bad happened to me. After that, I got up and figured out a whole new way to do my hair." It seemed to Lena that Lizzie was like a clock wound too tightly and running too fast. So this is a great description of Lizzie to put on the character chart. It's also a terrific simile. Lizzie's definitely a little high-strung, and Lena's looking for her to be focused and mature and patient, and these are qualities and characteristics that maybe Lena is looking for in her friend, but her friend may not possess them. So let's keep going. "She'd always been a little this way, But today she was more so than ever. Her gaze skipped from one spot to another, her fingers twiddled with the edge of her skirt. She looked paler than usual, too. Her freckles stood out like little smudges of dirt on her nose. "Lizzie," said Lena, beckoning her toward the table in the corner of her room, "I want to show you." But Lizzie wasn't listening. "You're so lucky to be messenger, Lena," she said. "Is it fun? I wish I could have been one. I would have been so good at it. My job is so boring." Lena turned and looked at her. "Isn't there anything you like about it?" Lizzie pursed her lips into a tiny smile and looked sideways at Lena. "There's one thing," she said. "What?" "I can't tell you. It's a secret." "Oh," said Lena. Then you shouldn't have mentioned it at all, she thought. "Maybe I'll tell you someday," said Lizzie. "I don't know." "Well, I like my job," Lena said. "But what I wanted to talk to you about was what I found yesterday. It's this." She lifted the box away and took up the piece of paper covered with patched-together document. Lizzie gave it a quick look. "Is it a message someone gave you that got all torn up?" "No. It was in our closet. Poppy was chewing on it. That's why it's torn up. But look at the writing. Isn't it strange?" "Uh-huh," said Lizzie. "You know who has beautiful handwriting? Myla Bone, who works with me. You should see it. It's got curly tails on the Y's and the G's and fancy loops on all the capital letters. Of course, Flabface hates it. He says it's illegible." Lena slid the piece of paper back over the pasted-down scraps. She wondered why she had thought Lizzie would be interested in what she'd found. She'd always had fun with Lizzie, but their fun was usually with games, hide and seek, tag, the kind of games where you run and climb. Lizzie had never been much interested in anything that was written on paper. So that's a good detail to add to Lizzie on your character chart. Lena quietly put the document back in its place and sat down with Lizzie on the floor. She listened and listened until Lizzie's chatter ran down. "I'd better go," Lizzie said. "It was fun to see you, Lena. I miss you." She stood up and fluffed her hair. "What was it you really wanted to show me?" "Oh, yeah, the fancy writing. Really nice. Lucky you to find it. Come and see me again soon, okay? I get so bored in that office." Lena made beet soup for dinner that night, and Poppy spilled hers and made a red lake on the table. Granny stared into her bowl, stirring and stirring the soup with her spoon, but she didn't eat. She didn't feel quite right, she told Lena. After a while, she wandered off to bed. Lena cleaned up the kitchen quickly. As soon as her chores were out of the way, she could get back to studying her document. She washed Poppy's clothes. She sewed on the buttons that had come off her messenger jacket. She picked up the rags and sacks and the boxes and bags that Granny had tossed out of the closet. And by the time she had done all of this and put Poppy to bed, she still had almost half an hour to study the fragments of paper. So let's just jump back here for a minute. A red lake of beet soup. That's a nice metaphor up there. She sat down at her desk and uncovered the document. With her elbows on either side of it and her chin resting in her hand, she pored over it. Though Lizzie and Captain Fleary had paid it no attention, Lena still thought this torn-up page must be important. Why else would it have been in such a cleverly fastened box? Maybe she should show it to the mayor, she thought reluctantly. She didn't like the mayor. She didn't trust him either. But if this document was important to the future of the city, he was the one who should know about it. Of course, she couldn't ask the mayor to come to her house. She pictured him puffing up the stairs, squeezing through the door, looking disapprovingly at the clutter in their house, recoiling from Poppy's sticky hands. No, it wouldn't do. So, important to add to Lena that she doesn't like or trust the mayor, because that's kind of coloring her way of handling this situation. But she didn't want to take her carefully patched together document to the gathering hall either. It was just too fragile. The best thing to do, she decided, was to write the mayor a note. She settled down to do this. She found a fairly unspoiled half piece of paper, and using a plain pencil, she wasn't going to waste one of her colored ones on the mayor. She wrote, "Dear Mayor Cole, I have discovered a document that was in the closet. It is instructions for something. I believe it is important because it is written in very old printing. Unfortunately, it got chewed up by my sister, so it's not all there. But you can still read some bits of it, such as, marked with E, find door of bow, small steel pan. I will show you this document if you want to see it. Sincerely yours, Lena Mayfleet, Messenger, 34 Quillam Square. She folded the note in half and wrote Mayor Cole on the front. On her way to work the next morning, she took it to the gathering hall. No one was sitting at the guard's desk, so Lena left the note there, placed so that the guard would see it when he arrived. Then, feeling that she had done her duty, she went off to her station. Several days went by. The messages Lena carried were full of worry and fear. Do you have any extra baby drink? I can't find it at the store. Have you heard what they're saying about the generator? We can't come tonight. Grandpa B won't get out of bed. Every day when she got home from work, Lena asked Granny, did a message come for me? But there was nothing. Maybe the mayor hadn't gotten her note. Maybe he'd gotten it and paid no attention. After a week, Lena decided she was tired of waiting. If the mayor wasn't interested in what she had found too bad for him, she was interested. She would figure it out herself. Twice during the week, when Poppy and Granny were both asleep, she had a little free time. She spent this time making a copy of the document in case anything happened to the fragile original. It had taken her a long time. She used one of the few remaining pieces of paper, an old label slightly torn from a can of peas. The copy was as accurate as she could make it, with the missing bits between the letters carefully indicated as dashes. She had tucked it under the mattress of her bed for safekeeping. Now, she finally had a whole free evening. Poppy and Granny were both asleep, and the apartment was tidy. Lena sat down at her table and uncovered the patched-together document. She tied back her hair so it wouldn't keep falling in her face, and she put a piece of paper next to her, blank except for a little bit of Poppy's scribbling, to write down what she decoded. She started with the title. The first word she already figured out. It had to be instructions. The next word could be for. Then came EGRES. She wasn't sure about that. Maybe it was someone's name? Egriston? Instructions for Egriston. She decided to call it the instructions for short. She went on to the first line. This offic doc probably meant this official document. Maybe secure meant secure or security. Then there were the words period and ears and city. But after that, so much was missing. She studied the line next to the number 1, exp. That could be expect or expert or so many things. She moved on to riv. That might be part of a word like drive or strive. What could ip and orc possibly be? They were so close together, maybe they're part of one word. What ended with ip? Whip, Lena thought. Trip, slip. What ended with orc? Fork came to mind immediately. Trip fork? Slip fork? Nothing she could think of made sense. Maybe it wasn't fork. What else ended in orc? Starting at the beginning of the alphabet, Lena went through all the words that rhymed with fork. Most of them were nonsense. Bork, dork, gork, hork, jork. This isn't going to work, she thought miserably. Oh, work! The word could be work. Then, what would the first part be? Trip work, flip work, but that... Maybe there was a letter in between the P and the W. Dips, pips. Suddenly it came to her. Pipeworks! Pipeworks, that had to be it. Something in this message was about the pipeworks. Ha ha ha. Lena looked at exp and riv. Riv. That could be river. Rapidly, she ran her eyes down the page. In line 3, she saw iverb ink. That looked like riverbank. The word door jumped out from line 4. Hole on its scrap of paper. Lena took a quick breath. A door. What if it was the one she'd wished for, the one that led to the other city? Maybe her city was real after all, and these were the instructions for finding it. She wanted to leap from her chair and shout. The message had something to do with the river, a door, and the pipeworks. And who did she know who worked in the pipeworks? Doone, of course. She pictured his thin, serious face and his eyes looking out searchingly from beneath dark eyebrows. She pictured how he used to bend over his work at school, holding his pencil in a hard grip, and how during free time he was usually off by himself in a corner studying a moth or a worm or a taken apart clock. That was the one thing at least that she liked about Dune. He was curious, he paid attention to things, and he cared about things too. She remembered how he'd been on assignment day, so furious at the mayor, so eager to trade his good job for a bad one so he could help save the city. And he'd taken Poppy inside his father's shop on the day of the blackout so she wouldn't be afraid. Why had she stopped being friends with Dune? She vaguely recalled the incident of the light pole. It seemed so silly now and long ago. The more she thought about Dune, the more it seemed he was the very person, the only person, who might be interested in what she had found. She placed the plain sheet of paper over the instructions and put the box on top. I'll go and find Dune, she thought. Tomorrow was Thursday, their day off. She would find him tomorrow and ask for his help. So, my friends, that is the end of chapter 7. Please add to Lena under major events that she is decoding the instructions that she found in the lockbox. You can also add that she is going to ask Dune for help. You might want to keep track of the fact that she had asked for Lizzie's input and she had asked for Captain Fleury's input, neither of whom were able to help her. But Dune, I think, is the right choice, and I'm sure you do too, based on what we know about Dune, right? For Dune, you might want to add, if you haven't already described him as serious, we know that that's been brought up as a descriptor for him multiple times. But you may want to add that, during his free time at school, he was studying. He was looking at moths and worms. We know he collects bugs. He paid attention to things. He was curious. So those are good details to add to Dune on your character chart. So, my dears, this is hopeful. This is positive. This is moving in a good direction. But guess what? You're going to have to wait till next week to find out what happens. But in the meantime, make sure that you do your vocabulary slides. Make sure that you add to your character chart. And, make sure that you, are ready to do a fun interactive game for these chapters when we jump into it. And don't forget what a portmanteau is. That's my one hint to you. Okay? That being said, have a great day. And if you have any questions, send me an email. Have a good one. Bye.